Pioneer brand canola with Optimum Gly, the highest yielding glyphosate-tolerant trait on the market. What's next in canola happens here. Along with extra time and lower instances of unpredictable weather, there are a variety of benefits that come with fall ESN application. Learn more at smartnitrogen.com.
Welcome to The Truth About Ag. Welcome to the Truth About Ag podcast. I am your host, Evan Schout, and I get to do all the heavy lifting today by myself because my co-host, Christian Hebert, I think is running a combine right now. So remember, like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, and I get to say one new thing today. We are now part of the Real Ag Media Network with Mr. Sean Haney, and we get to distribute on his channel, so make sure you check out the Real Ag media channels and all his distribution sites. So we are excited about that. So Clint, you're actually the second guest, but you're the first one I've actually had the ability to announce that with. So
hey, that's a big deal. Congratulations.
Yeah, it's been good. We've been looking for a little collaboration with him in the past, and this kind of worked out well for us. And the podcast has been fun, and he's noticed a bit. So I think it should be a really good collaboration. I think so.
Good.
Yeah, the other two things I want to pitch while I'm on here, because my business partner wouldn't be happy if I didn't, but Farmer Coach, our new cohorts are open this November, so please have a look at those. And then obviously Maverick Ag, where we are taking on some consulting clients still and doing our thing. So some exciting news coming in November for it, so keep watching some of the Twitter feed with that. But get all that advertising out of the way. Now I get to present what I'm really excited about. So today, Mr. Clint Fischer I have on, and anybody who doesn't know him obviously isn't on Twitter because I've been spending the last few months following your stuff, and I really love it. And I've reached out, and you and I have kind of talked on DMs before. So I wanted to have you on, but I want to start. I'm going to let you do your own sales pitch. So give me the background of Mr. Clint Fischer.
Sure, yeah. Well, I appreciate you having me on, and I really enjoy what you and what you do on Twitter, but then also, what you're doing with this podcast. I'm an attorney in South Dakota, and I primarily help farm families transition operations either to the next generation or to some other third party. And I use transition and I separate that from just merely estate planning, because estate planning is what happens to your property when you pass away. But transitioning an operation involves so much more than that. It involves how are we transitioning the business management during our lifetime? Are there some tax or other reasons to transition ownership during our lifetime? And so it's kind of an all-encompassing world in which I work as an attorney. And so what I get to do is help out a lot on the business side as well. And that's through various business management stuff, setting up entities for risk management, liability issues, and then, just looking at what are the best management practices that are out there to, ranges from lease agreements to other various contracts and things of that nature. So I'm heavily involved in the ag world for my day job, and that had led me to kind of talking about some of these issues of inheritance, of transition, succession planning within agriculture online, which is where a lot of people have found me. That kind of evolved into this online peer group called Braintrust Ag, where that's my side project that my wife says takes up too much of my time, but that's all right. And that's a growing online community where we kind of discuss in more detail a lot of these scenarios. What's the best way to start, grow, and transition an ag operation is really what we're trying to focus on. So we don't spend a lot of time talking about the weather. We don't spend a lot of time talking about the markets. We talk about the business management side of things and, how do we pass it down to the next generation? And so check us out at braintrustag.com. That's the about me.
I'm not gonna lie, you're probably the only lawyer that may ever be on this podcast, so take that as a benefit, Clint. But yeah, the big thing to me was I honestly didn't know you were a lawyer until I did a little bit further deep dive, because obviously I follow you more on the social media side. But from my perspective, obviously the transition side, a lot of your conversations go that way, but you don't approach it the same as I've seen. So you approach it more with case studies, and that's where I see some of the Twitter following and stuff is it's not just do this, do that. It's, I encountered this family. This is what kind of the theory and the case behind it was. And you open it up for people to actually give comments rather than just throw in your own opinion. So I guess where did that come from? And I don't want to do all social media here, but I kind of want to know where that openness on Twitter and how you got the interaction going off the start, I guess.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'll be blunt. It started because I'm not that smart and I'm trying to learn from other people. And so to post a scenario out there, and there's a lot of people smarter than me who have gone through a similar situation, and being able to kind of be that independent advisor role, third party, look at it a little bit more objectively and weigh, remove some of the emotion out of things. But frankly, I think the best way to drive home a point or to even learn anything new is through storytelling, is through understanding a personal connection to, be invested in whatever the scenario is. And so that's been my approach to a lot of these things. I'll put up something that's just purely educational. Here's all the different roles of a trustee in an irrevocable trust, and there'll be like 6 people who look at it and go, "Oh, that's boring." But then I talk about a scenario where there's an irrevocable trust and farmland's tied up in there, and we're trying to get it out of there or something. Then, oh boy, things get heated at that point. So that's just been the approach is really that storytelling method.
Well, and that's honestly what I laugh about, because I write a whole bunch of blogs, and honestly, we'll get some uptake on some, and then some on not so much on others. But then our PR group will put a post up about consolidation or the next generation not being able to buy land, and then I just get inundated with 300 different comments and impressions. So it's an interesting. Social media is getting more and more interesting the longer I'm on it. Let's put it that way.
Well, and one of the things the trends that I've been seeing, and I'm new to the social media game, relatively in the grand scheme of things, but one of the trends that I'm seeing is more of a willingness to talk about, hey, here's what happened in our scenario from a transition succession planning standpoint, and here's what went right, here's what went wrong. Now, I will say that with a caveat that oftentimes the ones that go wrong are the ones that get the most eyeballs.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to learn from the ones that went right. And so, how do we balance those things out? But just in general, the willingness to talk about succession planning within agriculture, we all can sit down and recognize the need for it. But, it's a delicate topic, because not only is there the legal and the business side of things, but there's the family relationships and the family drama, and just human dynamics to it. And so, frankly, a lot of my time is spent doing non-legal work, and that is, just talking through structures and relationship efforts, and we actually do that quite a bit within like Braintrust Ag. It's the soft skills side of running and transitioning a business.
Oh yeah, no, and I'll be the first one. I mean, we do transition and succession through Maverick as well, and that's not my top skill, the soft side stuff. Obviously, give me a business case and I can build you the perfect transition plan. But what I find is the communication side is usually where the wrench gets thrown in the plan really quickly.
Yeah. As an example, I was just a couple of weeks ago, I was talking, I do some presenting as well, some speeches and things, but I was just presenting to a group of Midwest farmers. They have kind of their own farmer-led peer group, and so they invited me in to be a guest speaker. And so, I did, I don't know, half hour of kind of explaining some of the good things that I see and the pitfalls to try and avoid through the succession planning process. And then we sat there for an hour fielding questions. And I don't think I gave one single legal, not legal advice, but nothing was even legally asked
Yeah.
during that hour Q&A. It was all, here's the situation with my father or my mother, or, how do I handle this? And it's just communication and willingness to listen, and willingness to not be, if you're the younger generation, to not be, I guess, viewed as, or to not approach it with your hand out like you're entitled, and just how do you maneuver around some of those family dynamics. And that's a tricky thing, but it's frankly the majority of what we talk about.
And I think that's probably why it's avoided at all costs, usually on farms. I mean, I don't know the U.S. statistics, but I know the 2021 census in Canada. I mean, there was 14% of farms have actually gone down the succession planning route. So that kind of gives you a pretty good market share for what you're doing, but B, it also kind of highlights a pretty big red flag that we have in agriculture right now, I believe.
Yeah, I agree. And I'd be remiss to not bring up this point, but I often, one of the questions I get asked frequently is, what are the operations who are doing it right? Who have you seen successfully do it? And frankly, there's a couple key components that I often see, and that is they're really treating the operation as a business.
Yep.
It's not just a lifestyle. It's not completely intertwined into their family, their personal lives, right? And so there's the business over here, then there's the family over here. And I know you talk about that all the time, Evan.
I was going to say, you better be careful. They're going to think I gave you my script.
Yeah, no, but it's true, because the ability to objectively view the land and the equipment and the financial performance of the operation versus having that, real deep emotional connection, it just makes that transition process so much smoother. So we're willing to have the discussions, and then we're willing to put it down in writing, and then we're willing to execute on that plan and have like a post-transition period. And it's just that, to me, is how I kind of tie the business management side, because that's really my background is in business management, and then I became an attorney later. And how do I tie those things together? They can't be seen in two separate buckets, right? I think that they need to be really viewed together in order for it to be effective.
Well, and that's what we started finding was, I mean, obviously there's always emotion. I mean, family enterprises, but as you said, the ones that I see and I use as my examples in most of my discussions, those are the ones that could actually, we're in a boardroom. Yes, it's an emotional discussion, but we still have to worry about the business side. So it's more based around, fair compensation, roles, communication. And what I find is a lot of times the biggest conflicts, especially on the personal side, come in because communication is just not there. And it's like you said, the discussion of don't go in with your handout. And the same as on the exiting generation, don't go out trying to hold everything so close to the chest and not share and be transparent, right? Like there's always two arguments, and I laugh. I was presenting in Alberta somewhere, and one of the elderly gentlemen stood up and he says, what's up with this next generation? They're all entitled. And so I gave my answers, and then the next question that came up was a young guy stood up and he goes, what's up with this old generation? They always believe that we're not good enough to do it.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting dynamic for sure.
Well, it takes, for a successful transition, it takes willingness from both parties.
Yep.
Okay, nothing can be forced here. Otherwise, you're just going to wait for an inheritance and then deal with the fallout from that. But for a smooth, planned out, well executed transition, both generations need to be willing, one, to take on the role and understand the viewpoint from each other's background, and hey, I'm the owner generation. This has been my livelihood for my entire life. This is my life's work, and it's more than just a 9-to-5 job, obviously. And therefore, I have this deep-seated tie to the lands, to the operation as a whole. And then from the next generation standpoint, they're saying, man, if this isn't financially beneficial to my family, I don't necessarily want to go through the struggle and the turmoil that I've seen from that owner generation have to happen. And so maybe I'm going to be a little bit more reluctant to put in the hours or the effort or the sacrifices necessary unless something changes from the kind of the business side and we make this thing a little bit more structured so that it is financially viable, in the future. And so there's give and take, but it really takes a willingness to have that conversation from both generations. One of the things that I often do on that note, Evan, is I'll sit down both generations separately and I got a worksheet, and basically it's laying out what are the goals that you want to have, you want to see have happen throughout this transition process, short term, medium term, long term, and some prompts to help them through it. But they're separate rooms.
Mm-hmm.
Fill them out separately. Owner generation, successor generation. Bring those two pieces of paper together and you look across them and you go, all right, these match up. These don't, right? So we can see these places where we agree, but where we're not in agreement, compromise is going to have to happen. Otherwise, there's going to be conflict and resentment, and then kids are going to be telling the story of what, how you got screwed out of the land.
Yeah. Well, and I found that, and I mean, I don't want to age myself too much, but I've been around the industry long enough to see, and as professionals, I finally just came to the conclusion that there's some that just won't work. So like for us, there's transition plans where I've left the first meeting and been like, guys, you're not close enough to even have this. I mean, from my standpoint, this isn't even possible. And I find some professionals don't like to have that discussion off the start. They'd rather try and fit, a round,
Yeah,
or a square peg into a round hole. Yeah. But you end up with the conflict. And I used to laugh because when I was with M&P, and the one quote that one of the advisors always used was, the goal is to sit down and have Christmas together. And I used to love that quote. And then after doing it for a while, I realized that, if you're bankrupt, Christmas isn't that fun either.
Yeah.
So yeah. It's a bit of a two-edged sword, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And that's one of the kind of ties into one of the frequently asked questions is, all right, so I've got one kid who wants to take over the operation. Well, what the heck do I do with these 2 or 3 who are off farm? My assets are $2 million in farm assets and $100,000 in an, IRA over here. What am I going to do? How am I going to split that up? And unless there's a plan, you're right, that Christmas dinner is going to be filled with resentment with some of the siblings.
One way or the other way.
One way or another.
Yeah.
And so let's figure, and there are tools. I answered that question as there are tools, there are structures that you can kind of get the best of both worlds. At least you'll get it so that we're not going to have siblings who just don't talk to each other or estranged kids because of how things were handled. And that's the goal, right? The goal is not to protect every single dime or save every single dime of taxes.
Yeah.
The goal isn't to preserve, whatever, piece of equipment there is. The goal is this operation to be financially viable moving forward in a manner that would honor the legacy of that owner generation. I mean, that's really what we're trying to accomplish, and there are ways to do it.
Yeah, and I think that's the part that, and I mean, obviously U.S. law versus Canadian law is probably a little different, but I mean, over the last few years, there's been a lot of different ways to actually, as you said, accomplish the fair and equitable so that the fight isn't on as soon as, the older generation isn't there anymore. And what we're starting to find is that whole phrase about fair and equitable didn't have to be the same. That doesn't hold water as true anymore because, yes, insurance might be not big enough to cover because of the land values, but there is other options, whether it's, land holding companies split between the kids and buyouts and long-term leases. And there's a million ways to do it.
Yep.
It's so that old adage that the, firstborn son is taking everything and the rest are fending for themselves doesn't quite hold water as much anymore, I guess would be the phrase.
Yeah, it doesn't. And, back to our point of willingness from both sides, oftentimes a stumbling block that I'll run into is the kid who is kind of tapped as the successor is either resentful for working for free, quote unquote, working for my inheritance.
Sweat equity.
Sweat equity, right?
Yeah.
And then, then the owner generation just procrastinates because how the heck do I value that?
Yeah.
And do I need to value that? What's the right answer? Well, there's formulas that we can do, but honestly, those are going to be a far cry from what is the relationship like between, parents, children, and siblings, and go that route. But I'm glad that you used the word equitable and fair instead of equal, because we're not going to maybe make it exactly dollar for dollar equal, but there are tools to make it equitable. You just might get paid out over a longer term.
Longer term. Yeah. And that's what it is. Like you said, it may not be equal on day one, but there is an equation to get it there. And the other part is you're not wrong. Like the whole communication, transparency, like even on the meetings where we have the kids in the non-farming siblings actually in the meeting, because anything that the parents are going to say to me, I want them to actually cover off with the non-farming siblings, because that's not the job of the actual farming sibling.
Yeah.
And the other one on the sweat equity piece is that's why I tell people that transition starts not when those kids are 40. Transition starts when, 15 to 18, when they're starting to decide if they're coming back. Because not only do you want that fair compensation set up early so you don't have to worry about sweat equity in quotations, but the other one is I also don't want two individuals on the farm with the exact same skill set.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I don't want son going down the exact same degree as dad, because you want half the fights I see. Half the fights are because they both want the same job.
Yeah. Well, and you bring up that as a good point. When we're looking at, properly looking at somebody coming into the operation, what skill set are they bringing?
Yeah.
Are they going to add value, or are they just part of the operation because of their last name?
Yeah.
And if it's the latter, well, we need to really reassess, is this best for the business side of the operation going forward? And if not, what kind of training or off-farm job do they need to get for experience? Anything to make them actually provide value and then grow as a leader, as a manager of, whatever the portion of their operation is that they're in charge of. Without that, yeah, you're right. You see a lot of, well, they're a good tractor driver, but are they a good business manager? I don't know.
Yeah, we always call it time, brains, and money. So literally, you wouldn't take on a partner if they weren't coming with either a labor component, a management component, or an investment. But yet on farm transition, you can have a child coming in that has none of those things and doesn't want to give you half those things, and you're like, oh, I'll make them farm CEO in 10 years.
Yep.
And that's you're correct. Like there's got to be an experience or an education component in order to get them to the point, because the numbers are too big now. It's not the same as it was 2 decades ago.
And it takes time to develop that. It takes, especially you think about a growing season. Most of the listeners have a 1-year growing season, and I mean that you're going to get 40 chances to do it, something like that, before it's time to go sunset. And it's takes time to learn all those ins and outs. The other thing that I've found that it takes time for is just understanding the vendor relationships and how impactful that owner who has been through all the ups and downs and the relationships that they've built, how hard it is to really transition those relationships down and pass those down. Just because dad had a good relationship with whoever the vendor is, or the input guy, or the cattle buyer, or whatever we're talking about, doesn't necessarily mean that son or daughter's personality is going to mesh and continue that on. And so either they need to be able to develop their own contacts and provide value that way, or have a way to follow in the other generation's footsteps from a relationship standpoint.
Yeah, and we didn't even bring up landlords, right? Like and I know the U.S. is considerably different than us. I mean, we have 1 or 2 landlords per farm, where you guys, I think that number is quite significantly different for a lot of operations in the U.S. So
I threw that question up there on Twitter. I don't know, this might be 6 months ago, and I think somebody said they had like over 100 landlords.
Oh, I
There's
couldn't imagine.
eastern part of the U.S. where they had 5-10 acre parcels. And I thought, oh, but how are you managing that, right? Getting back to the
Yeah.
business management side, it's are we cultivating those relationships, or are we just kind of taking them for granted?
Yeah.
And also, I get a lot of pushback when I just stress getting lease agreements in writing.
Yeah.
And I get pushback saying, handshakes and I don't need to be able to look them in the eye and trust them. Well, that's great. Shake their hand after you sign the document.
Yeah. Yeah. We preach a lot on that, not to mention, I mean, not to go with you on the lawyer side, but I mean, shareholder agreements, all that stuff, with the amount of dollars and cents that are around now, they just become required. And honestly, I've got a couple farms where that shareholder agreement is my number one tool because it's already dictating the decision making. It's avoiding conflict before conflict even starts because you signed off. We already have the roadmap. You can't change it halfway through, right?
Exactly. Yep. It really does two things. A well properly drafted one. It does two things really well. The first and foremost thing it does is it lays out an exit strategy. Mm-hmm. Because whenever there's multiple people, there's going to be potential of somebody wanting to go off, get tired of it, get injured, get divorced, disabled, dies. What the heck is the exit strategy for this operation? Yeah. And then two, it dictates how it's managed and who has the voting rights and who, how are the day-to-days going to be handled? How are the big, significant purchases or sales going to be handled? And it's just when it's laid all out in writing and clear and everybody agrees to it, man, it's so much easier to pull that thing out and say, no, this is what we agreed to. Sure, you can change it. You get everybody in agreement and sign it off in writing. Sure, you can amend that. But until that's amended, this is what needs to control. And that's just it makes that document be the bad guy versus a person being the bad guy.
Well, and I laugh because one of my early clients when I was a manager in the accounting firm, we had a succession a succession partner there that comes in, and he'd never met this group before. And it was 3 brothers and a dad. And he walks in, he looks at them, and his first thing he says is not, "Hi, my name is so-and-so." He goes, "So which one of you is getting divorced?" And they kind of looked at him. They said, "What?" He says, "Well, the divorce rate right now in Canada is 1 in 4. So one of you is getting divorced. I just want to know what the plan is." and that was his opening line to a shareholder agreement and everything else, right? So it was interesting, but that's the truth, right? Like it's those events you don't plan for.
Right. Yeah. You don't if you don't have some kind of a mechanism to handle that when the inevitable happens, none of us are getting off this rock alive. And so at the very least, it ought to describe what happens if one of the partners is no longer here. But also, it's all the risks that are associated with it. You can call it the 3, 5, 6 Ds, whatever you want to call it, but they need to be addressed in that agreement. And it's painful. It takes time and money to set it up and structure it properly, but it's one of those things where it's an investment up front to just prevent and address future issues in a way that is going to potentially save the operation.
Yeah, I've had a couple circumstances where brothers and cousins are all farming together, and one passes away, and all of a sudden the aunt is a majority shareholder in the company.
Yep.
And it's like that one probably should have been planned out, before this occurred.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of scenarios where, I mean, there's issues where you get a personal judgment or a bankruptcy or something, and if you're a general partner without any protections against you, now I'm standing liable for a lot of that issue as well, and it's how are we going to be, just being proactive versus reactive.
Well, and it's funny because so in our operation, both myself and the COO, Jeff, are both, equity shareholders in the actual operation. So It's a bit unique style, but it was also came down to the fact that, if Christian, my main business partner and owner of the farm, something were to happen to him, I left a pretty good paying job. Jeff left a pretty good paying job to come here, and without a transition plan, or an agreement in place, like what does that leave us, right? So it's not just built for families, it's actually built for the organization as a whole.
Completely. And we can use these entities to incentivize employees, right? So maybe we can't afford to pay as high of a cash, amount, but we can compensate them through equity. We can compensate them through some kind of a profit sharing, a structure in order to incentivize quality employees. And frankly, there's a handful of people I'm working with right now who don't have a child who's interested in taking over the operation.
Mm-hmm.
They want to see the farm stay together, right? They don't want to just sell it for parts. And so they're looking at an employee coming on, learning kind of a trial period, apprenticeship, you might call it, and then starting to earn equity within the operation. And that's pretty tough to do without setting up an entity in order to accomplish that and get protections for both parties out of that deal.
But it was interesting. I put that out over social. I can't remember how long ago was they were talking about succession and transition. I said, like, what if your son, and we discussed it earlier, what if your son's not meant to be farm CEO? Or are you willing to bring in an outside third party to run the operation? And your son might be the best operator there is, and he might be the controlling shareholder at one point through the estate. But are you actually willing to put someone else in charge? And it was an interesting question, because on our farm, when Jeff came on, our COO, he actually was in charge of staffing and marching orders, and Christian's dad was still involved in the organization. So it was interesting dynamics back then. And it's an interesting question, because I think agriculture is going to go that way if we'll let it.
Yeah, it is. I think it necessarily either goes that way or it's a part-time vocation.
Okay. Yeah.
And then it's more the lifestyle side, or where we still have the ties to the land. However, I'm not drawing a full family living or cost of living off of the farm operation, which we see a lot of that now already. Full-time job, in-town job and farm on the side. But the necessity, again, you're just harping on this, and I love it, of treating it as that business, being able to look objectively of what is providing the most value, and looking into the future, so that we can continue this farm legacy for the next generation, the next generation, the next generation. If that's what your goal is, well, we need to set it up now, and then we need to instill those values and make sure we have those shared interests and values, family values, farm values, whatever you want to call it, a mission statement that gets passed down to that next generation. Or else, we'll see somebody see a payday and just, want to rent it out or sell it out or, whatever. And if that's what you want to do, that's fine too. And you can structure it in a tax efficient manner. However, the folks I usually work with are ones who want to pass down that farm to the next generation.
Well, and I mean, I'll get destroyed for saying this, but I mean, Sam Walton started with one Walmart store, and we know where that went. And I think when people look at agriculture, they just don't believe it's possible, but it's more or less just a legacy business. And that's where I think the divide is we always think agriculture is so different from every other industry. It can't be done. And all it is processes and people.
And Walmart's CEO is not a Walton.
No, thank you. Okay, let me pull you out of the transition side. I think I pulled your brain for a lot of that, and we're coming up to our time. So I wanted to pull you back into the peer group side a bit, because I know with Braintrust Ag, I mean, that I've seen you advertise it, I've seen the members, and obviously you're growing quite fast. So I want to know, like, why peer groups?
Yeah.
And B, what are the big benefits that you are seeing? I know you mentioned it earlier, but some of the biggest benefits you're seeing from these guys being part of this group.
Yeah. Well, so to answer your first question, why peer group? It didn't start as a peer group. It started as a way for me to be able to answer more questions than I was able to, through DMs or however, just people wanting to know what are some resources that I can work, be a better manager of my operation? How can I transition this thing better? Like, what are some resources? And so it's really started as kind of a clearinghouse of these tools. And I thought, all right, I'll direct people there, and then that'll be that. Quickly, that turned into folks saying, hey, do you know anybody who has done this? Or do you know anybody who has a similar situation who I can talk to about this? And what I found is there was this desire for connection of like-minded people, and that isn't maybe as open as Twitter or as out there into the world, so that we can get a little bit deeper. We can peel a couple of the layers of the onion back and actually talk about something significant to the operation. And I think of it as like the local farmer coffee hour, only we don't have the next door neighbor who is quote unquote a competitor who we're trying to learn from or share resources with, right? And so now,
and lying to us at every corner.
Yeah, right. And so now we have this ability, thanks to the internet, right, to connect across borders, and what works in Canada could potentially be working down in Oklahoma or in Alabama. And I see, a lot of the similarities as far as, obviously production methods are going to be changed, and, inputs, all that kind of stuff are going to vary. But actually, the business management principles are pretty consistent, across, pretty simple, pretty consistent across boundaries. And, so this ability to meet other folks and connect with people who are smarter than us. And what I really like about it is I can ask a question and I'll get input from an attorney, from a CPA, from an insurance guy, from a 1031 exchange specialist, and 4 farmers who have done a similar situation. And I can get all that information, relatively quickly. That really helps either my operation or somebody I'm helping, and just sharing of that information, I think, is key. The other thing that I found is, it's something that it's September when we're recording this, and what do they call that? The Mental Health Awareness Month or whatever.
Yeah.
But there's a desire for a lot of people to kind of figure out a way to overcome the isolation that's inherent in agriculture. And by that, I mean, like this morning, every Wednesday morning, we get together and we talk about personal development and kind of a Bible study led thing for 30 minutes. And I've gotten to know these guys so well, who are on every week, and just be able to talk about what's going on in our lives, and knowing that, hey, I'm talking to somebody who I trust because you're part of the tribe here. And just that connection has really helped out. And then I guess kind of the third component of why the peer group is to be able to connect experts in their agricultural craft with members, and be able to provide directed answers through various recorded meetings. And so we've done succession planning experts, we've done insurance and commodity marketing and bankers, and government loan officers, and just being able to bring your specific questions to somebody who you wouldn't otherwise know of exists or have met, who actually has gone through it and who actually understands the ag nuances of a lot of these professions, has just been really valuable.
No, and I love you brought up the mental health part, because I mean, the last few weeks in Canada, obviously between drought conditions and rail strike and new tariffs on canola products, every email I send now usually has some sort of line at the bottom of mental health, because obviously it's going to be a long few months here until the crops are off and we actually find out how much damage has been done the last 3-4 weeks. But it's not exactly the most pleasant conversations I'm having these days. So
I'm going to leave you with this example. A few weeks ago, like I mentioned, these Wednesday morning peer group meetings that we have. I usually prepare something ahead of time, and we kind of walk through a book that helps us out, and I was gone and I didn't have time or just I hadn't prepared anything. So we just get on and there's, I don't know, 8 or 10 of us on there. And, I just said, oh, let's just kind of open it up to discuss. And one of the guys, he said, I woke up middle of the night last night. I woke up my wife and I just said, I don't think I can do this anymore. Now, I didn't follow up with if he meant farming or if he meant living.
Yeah.
But regardless, he said he followed that up with, but I knew I needed to be on here. I knew I needed to get encouragement from you guys. And this is where I needed to be this morning. And so I'm just thankful. And that really hit me. And then to follow that up about an hour later, I got an email from one of the members who has been on every one of our calls, but has never taken his screen off of, he's never turned his
video
camera on.
Yeah.
And he's never said anything. And he sent me an email and he said, I needed to be on this call this morning because I have been contemplating suicide.
Ooh.
And I got this email and he sent me his number and I called him. We talked for a little while. But hearing those things, man, it's real. It's not something that we put on social media for clicks and for likes. It is a real issue, and the more that we can recognize that, hey, we're maybe supposed to be the strong silent type, but there are people out there who are willing and able to answer and respond and support and encourage. And there's resources. So it's just impactful that just kind of happened here a few weeks ago.
Well, and I think part of it is, like you said, we're agriculture, we're farmers, we're rugged individualists. We're supposed to, succeed and fail alone by ourselves on our own in the dirt. And it's like that's long gone, guys. Those times are past. The new generations, we talk stuff out. Like there's people, there's help. So I think, I love the message. Thanks for sharing that, Clint.
Yep.
So I want to finish this. We're at our 40-minute mark here, but I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and I just kind of want the first, let's give it a sentence or 2 sentences that kind of come to your mind. And I pulled these off your Twitter feed. So I actually did some pre-work for this one.
Okay.
So,
All right.
So this is a big one. I actually did some time before this. So the first one, if you aren't born into the ag operation, can you still become a farmer?
Absolutely. One of my main focuses has been trying to figure out creative ways for non-farm young people to get involved with agriculture and start their own successful ag operation. Yes, it is doable. You just have to maybe not follow the trends of the 1920s and 30s.
How do you manage when different generations have different ideas and views on work?
That one is a little bit tricky. One of the things that I say is having a regular farm business meeting weekly to outline, here's the expectations that we all agree upon for the upcoming week, or review the past week. Here's the tasks. Here's the roles, responsibilities that we've got coming up, and having that regular business meeting is either going to make it sink or swim. And so it takes some compromise, but it takes communication, right? It's back to that idea of we need to communicate, because I'm terrible at delegating personally. And so I expect you, Evan, to read my brain on every single thing that I'm asking you to do, and you can't read my brain. And so I need to recognize that about myself in order to communicate better.
Okay. Last one. Why does agriculture have a sentimental attachment to legacy?
That one, the answer is unique to every family, but there's something inherent about turning the land, and it goes back to biblical times where agriculture was how people showed off or had or grew wealth. That's how they had a tie to the earth. And so in agriculture, land specifically, there is a sentimental value that we try to honor, but also recognize that it's at the end of the day an asset that can be sold, bought, traded. And so to balance those, that's really the true mark of a successful succession plan, is to honor the legacy, but not live and die by the sentimental value.
Love it. I wanna thank you, Clint, for coming on. Obviously, we could probably do this for hours, so I'll probably have you back on sometime to get deeper into the transition side. But anything you want to plug before we go?
No, they can just find me on Twitter at Clint W. Fischer or BraintrustAg.com. Check us out. Come join us. And thank you, Evan. Happy to come on again sometime. And congratulations with the success of the show.
You betcha. So again, like, share, subscribe, and check us out on Real Ag Media, our newest collaboration. Mr. Haney, thank you very much for having us. And that's the truth about ag. Thanks for joining us. The Truth About Ag podcast is a proud member of the Heber Group, which includes Heber Grain Ventures, Maverick Ag, and Farmer Coach. We appreciate the support. Lastly, please like, comment, share, subscribe, and ring the bell. And if you have questions for a future podcast, please leave in the comments below. Thanks for listening.